Amara, get back to work right now or you'll regret it.
In the heart of Louisiana in 1849, there was a plantation so isolated, so shrouded in darkness, that even the stars seemed reluctant to shine over it. Its name was Black Hollow, a sprawling estate of twisted oaks and shadowed cabins, where every corner whispered secrets, and every shadow concealed a story of suffering. At the center of this darkness was its master, Elias Hawthorne, a man who ruled with a fearsome obsession. He was no ordinary overseer. To him, the enslaved were not merely laborers. They were instruments, extensions of his will, creatures to bend, break, and control. But what truly set Elias apart was his obsession with power beyond the daylight hours. When the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias transformed. He became a hunter, prowling through the cabins, the stables, and the fields, wielding authority like a weapon. The enslaved whispered his name in fear, the Night Master. They spoke of lanterns flickering in the windows, footsteps echoing across the dirt paths, the chilling whistle that meant he was near. To the men and women who lived under his dominion, night was no sanctuary, it was a trap. Among the enslaved was Amara, a young woman of extraordinary courage and cunning, only 21 but with a presence that belied her years. Amara had known hardship from the moment she was born into chains. Her mother, a survivor of previous plantations, had whispered secrets of survival and stealth, lessons Amara had absorbed like breathing. She learned the language of silence, how to move without sound, how to blend with the shadows, how to watch and calculate. But it was not just survival that drove her. Amara's mind was sharp, her eyes attuned to every detail, her instincts honed by years of observing Elias's nocturnal rituals. She noticed patterns where others saw only chaos. She memorized the creak of each floorboard, the order in which the lanterns were lit, the timing of the night master's patrols. And in her heart, a plan began to form, a plan not just to endure but to turn the darkness against him. It was a world built on fear. One wrong word, one misstep could mean the lash, the stocks, or worse. Yet, within that terror, Amara found a strange clarity. The nights that were meant to instill dread in her became her schooling. Each passing hour, each hushed conversation, each secret glance among her fellow enslaved people taught her something. There was strategy in fear, and she intended to wield it like a weapon. Before we continue, if you find yourself drawn to stories of courage in the face of unimaginable oppression, subscribe to Hidden Tales and turn on notifications. Here, we uncover the voices history tried to silence and shine a light on stories that demand to be remembered. As the first night of our story unfolds, the air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes your skin cling and your breath heavy. Amara crouched near the edge of the main path, watching as Elias's silhouette emerged from the shadows. His coat flared behind him, boots striking the dirt with a measured rhythm, his lantern casting long, grotesque shadows across the cabins. He moved with purpose, checking doors, watching for signs of rebellion, enforcing obedience with the subtle threat that he might be watching even when unseen. This was not the first night, and it would not be the last, that Amara felt the icy grip of fear mixed with the fire of defiance. She remembered the story her mother had told her of a man who tried to outwit a master and lived to see freedom. She understood now that intelligence could be as sharp as any blade. And she began to notice cracks in Elias's armor, a slight hesitation when a child's cry pierced the night, a twitch of unease when a lantern flickered unexpectedly, a glance over his shoulder as if he suspected unseen eyes. Amara's strategy was forming. She would test boundaries, probe weaknesses, observe every detail, and prepare for the night when courage would meet opportunity. Each passing evening, each midnight patrol, each flicker of shadow added to her knowledge, sharpened her understanding. She began leaving small signs, subtle misdirections, messages hidden in plain sight, ways to communicate with others without being caught. The Night Master might believe he controlled everything, but in his overconfidence, he failed to notice the quiet genius of the one he thought powerless. And so, the first threads of rebellion were sown. Amara became not just a witness but a participant in a slow, deliberate unraveling. She was learning, preparing, and calculating. Every whispered conversation in the cabins, every hidden glance across the fields, every silent footstep was a lesson. And as the first weeks of the harvest passed, Amara realized one thing with chilling clarity. The Night Master was powerful, yes, but his arrogance, his obsession with control, was his undoing waiting to happen. In the dim light of dawn, as Elias returned to the main house, confident in the security of his reign, Amara retreated to the shadows, invisible yet acutely aware. Each night's events were stored in her mind, every detail catalogued. She knew that the true power of the enslaved did not lie in the lash, the toil, or the fear, but in the patience to wait, the wisdom to learn, and the courage to strike when the time was right. The story of Amara and the Night Master had only begun, and already, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundation of Black Hollow. The nights at Black Hollow had grown longer, or at least they felt that way to the enslaved souls who had no reprieve from the weight of oppression. By now, Amara had become almost invisible in the darkness, moving with a predator's grace, understanding the rhythm of the Night Master's patrols better than he did himself. Each step he took, each lantern lifted, each breath drawn through the night became a note in the symphony of his overconfidence. Elias Hawthorne, intoxicated by his own perceived omnipotence, believed he could command the unseen, enforce obedience without question, and quell rebellion before it could form. But in his arrogance, he underestimated the intelligence he sought to suppress. Amara's eyes, dark and sharp, missed nothing. She noted his habits, his patterns, even the subtle cues of doubt that crept into his expressions when a cabin door creaked too late or a child stirred in the wrong hour. Her own existence at Black Hollow had been carved from struggle. She had been born into chains, her mother's hands raw and scarred from labor, her father absent, lost to the cruel whims of the plantation's endless rotations. Yet, her upbringing was steeped not only in suffering but in knowledge. Her mother, a woman who had survived the lash and the threat of death, had taught Amara that the mind could be a weapon sharper than any blade, and patience could be a shield stronger than iron. As the second month of harvest passed, Amara began to experiment with subtle manipulations. She left messages in the dirt, marks that only the enslaved could understand, directions for small diversions, warnings of the Night Master's path, and coded signals that allowed her peers to move unnoticed. She began gathering intelligence. Which guards were loyal to Elias, which workers were willing to bend rules for survival, and which paths through the woods led to hidden streams where water could be drawn without detection. Each piece of information was catalogued mentally, stored for a time when it would matter most. One evening, a subtle shift occurred. A new worker had arrived, a young man from a nearby plantation, sent to Black Hollow under the guise of transfer. His eyes were wary, his body tense, yet he carried a quiet intelligence that Amara recognized immediately. She approached him slowly under the cover of night, observing him for days before revealing herself. Her whisper cut through the darkness. "You can trust me. But only if you understand what it means to survive here, and survive unseen." The young man nodded, and for the first time, Amara felt the weight of collaboration. Her plans were no longer just her own. She began coordinating small acts of rebellion, sabotaging tools to slow work, misdirecting the guards, and distracting the Night Master long enough for others to evade his gaze. Each night was a careful dance between risk and strategy, and Amara, patient and cunning, became the silent conductor orchestrating it all. Elias, ever confident, began to feel a strange unease. He could not explain it, yet the patterns of small failures, the subtle disobediences, the inexplicable avoidance of his gaze, it all gnawed at him. The Night Master's pride, once unshakable, began to crack. He increased his patrols, summoned more guards, and tried to assert dominance with harsher measures. Yet each action only revealed further weaknesses in his understanding, and Amara exploited them with surgical precision. It was during one particularly humid July night that Amara's intellect would truly begin to shine. The air was thick, the cicadas humming like a choir of warning. Elias had decided to conduct a sweep of the northern cabins, believing a group of the enslaved had hidden tools and food. Amara anticipated his route. She left subtle signs, footprints that led away from the hidden stashes, faint disturbances in the dirt that hinted at movements elsewhere. When Elias entered the northern sector, he found the signs he expected to catch. Yet each was a decoy, a calculated lie that led him deeper into the dark. Meanwhile, Amara moved silently between cabins, gathering intelligence, ensuring the safety of those most vulnerable. Her mind was sharp, calculating, constantly weighing risk against reward. She understood that one misstep could lead to immediate death. Yet she also knew that the Night Master's arrogance was her greatest ally. Each night, he assumed he controlled every movement, every sound, every breath. And each night he was proven wrong, though he did not yet understand why. By the third month, a sense of controlled chaos had settled over Black Hollow. The enslaved workers moved with cautious defiance. They whispered the name Amara not out of fear but reverence. She had become a symbol, a strategist, a guardian, a silent storm that shadowed the Night Master. Her courage inspired others, though none dared speak openly. Every small victory, Every avoided lash, every successful diversion was a testament to her brilliance. Yet, she understood that survival was only the beginning. To challenge Elias Hawthorne meant more than secrecy and cunning. It required a plan, meticulous and unyielding, that could turn the Night Master's obsession against him. And so, she began cataloging every flaw, every hesitation, every whisper of doubt. She plotted for the night when opportunity and courage would converge, and she would confront the tyranny of Black Hollow in a way that no one would expect. By now the stage had been set. The Night Master, oblivious to the true extent of his vulnerability, prowled the night with confidence born of hubris. And in the shadows, Amara waited, every sense alert, every thought focused, every step leading toward the moment when the hunted would become the hunted, when the darkness would reveal its true master. The nights at Black Hollow were no longer simply times of labor or punishment. They had become arenas of subtle warfare. Amara, a young black woman of fierce intelligence and courage, moved unseen yet omnipresent in the plantation's nocturnal world. Her understanding of Elias Hawthorne, the so-called Night Master, had deepened. Each whisper, each footstep, each flash of his piercing white eyes in the dark had been observed, catalogued, and analyzed. And she had begun to use this knowledge in ways that would soon unravel the empire of fear he had built. Amara's childhood had prepared her for these moments. Born to a mother who survived the lash with ingenuity and a father whose absence was a lesson in resilience, she learned early that the mind could be sharper than any whip and patience stronger than chains. By her adolescence, she had mastered the art of observation, reading the subtle tics, the unguarded expressions of both masters and guards. She memorized paths through the woods, the timing of patrols, and the exact way lantern light fell across each cabin. Every shadow was a potential ally, every silence a shield. The enslaved began to notice small but remarkable changes. Tools would disappear just before punishment, food rations would be mysteriously redistributed, and work orders were subtly undermined. Yet no one could trace these interventions back to her. They were ghostly acts, carefully orchestrated, impossible to anticipate. And in her heart, Amara knew that these small victories were only the beginning. The Night Master's pride, his belief that he was untouchable, was the true weapon she could exploit. On one humid evening, a sense of tension gripped the plantation. Elias, growing suspicious, had doubled his patrols and summoned the most loyal guards. Amara anticipated this. She moved swiftly and silently, conveying instructions to the others through gestures and marks in the dirt. Each slave she guided knew to move in perfect synchrony, creating a network of shadow and diversion. She became a conductor, orchestrating chaos that only she fully understood. The plan was audacious. Elias believed he was tracking a single group of disobedient workers, yet they were merely decoys. While he chased shadows, Amara and a small cadre of trusted companions infiltrated the northern storerooms, gathering evidence of his mismanagement, hoarding, and cruelty. She knew that one day these documents could expose his tyranny, but more immediately they gave her leverage. Her mind, however, was not content with mere survival or exposure. She wanted to destabilize the Night Master completely, to make him question his own omnipotence. She studied his habits, the way he breathed when he was angry, the subtle hesitation before issuing commands, and the slight tremor in his voice when confronted with defiance. Every weakness was an opportunity. It was during the late hours of a July night that Amara executed one of her most daring maneuvers. Elias, convinced of his superiority, led a patrol toward the river, suspecting that a small group of slaves had hidden supplies there. Amara had prepositioned small distractions, a fallen lantern, carefully placed footprints, and whispers meant to lure him off course. The Night Master, convinced he was in control, followed the cues, unaware that he was moving directly into a trap of his own making. Meanwhile, Amara ensured the safety of the young, the elderly, and the sick, guiding them through secret paths to hidden areas of the plantation where they could rest and hide without fear. Her strategic brilliance lay not only in deception but in protection. Every act of subversion was also an act of care. As the night wore on, the Night Master became increasingly disoriented. His frustration mounted. He could sense that something was amiss, but he could not locate the source. Each misstep, each failed pursuit, eroded his confidence. And in this erosion, Amara saw opportunity. The very arrogance that had sustained his reign now rendered him vulnerable to the intelligence and cunning he had always dismissed. She paused briefly in the shadows, her breath quiet, listening to the distant clatter of boots and the swish of the river. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon her. Every move had to be precise. Any mistake could cost lives. But the stakes, she understood, demanded audacity. By the end of the night, Elias had returned to the mansion, exhausted and increasingly paranoid. He could not comprehend how a single unseen force had disrupted his authority so completely. And in the quiet aftermath, Amara reviewed the night's successes. The hidden evidence secured, the enslaved safely protected, the Night Master's ego shaken. Each detail mattered, each outcome meticulously calculated. And so, the balance began to shift. The Night Master, believing himself all-seeing and omnipotent, had become ensnared by a mind he could not fathom. Amara's influence spread silently, invisibly, yet with a power far greater than any whip or lantern. And in the darkness of Black Hollow, a new order began to form, not one of fear but of intelligence, courage, and subtle defiance. If you are moved by Amara's brilliance, her courage, and her unwavering resolve, consider subscribing to Hidden Tales. Each story uncovers the voices history tried to bury, the heroes who survived in the shadows, and the truths that demand to be remembered. The days that followed were a tense web of calculated observation. Amara moved like a shadow through Black Hollow, noting every quiver of the Night Master's expression, every subtle sign of fear he tried to conceal. Elias Hawthorne, the master who once believed himself a god, was now haunted by a creeping unease. Whispers circulated among the enslaved, small murmurs of hope and daring, yet Amara knew they could not act recklessly. Every step had to be deliberate, every move precise. Amara had begun to infiltrate the household itself. She memorized the layout of the mansion, the positions of guards, and even the timing of Elias's meals and meetings. Every evening, when the wind shifted through the trees and the moonlight carved silver lines across the floors, she walked unseen through hallways, listening, learning, mapping his arrogance and vanity. Each discovery was a piece of a grand puzzle she had begun to assemble over months. Her intelligence network among the enslaved had expanded. Trusted companions acted as her eyes and ears, relaying information through coded marks and subtle signs. They observed Elias's weaknesses, the moments he hesitated before giving orders, the subtle tremor in his hand as he wielded authority, the obsession with his reputation among neighboring plantations. Amara recorded it all mentally, each observation a thread in a growing tapestry of control. One evening, under a sky veiled in mist, Amara executed her most audacious plan yet. She arranged for the Night Master to be lured to a secluded part of the estate, convinced by a fabricated tale of a small rebellion at the northern cabins. As Elias rode out with a squad of loyal guards, he believed he was asserting dominion, yet every path had been carefully orchestrated by Amara. Lanterns were tilted to create false shadows. Footprints and scattered tools created a trail that led him in circles. Meanwhile, Amara moved unseen among the cabins, ensuring that children, the elderly, and sick workers were hidden and protected. She supplied food and water to those who might have otherwise been vulnerable. Every decision was a calculated act of subversion, designed to shield the vulnerable while destabilizing the tyrant. The confrontation came quietly, like a storm gathering in the distance. Elias returned, his fury mounting with each perceived failure. He could not explain the chaos, the missing supplies, the failed captures. His confidence, once unshakable, had begun to erode. Amara observed him from the shadows, noting the strain in his posture, the glare that failed to mask fear. She smiled faintly, knowing that the power of intellect and planning had begun to rival brute force. By the end of that night, Elias Hawthorne had retreated to the mansion, exhausted and disoriented. Every act of defiance, every misstep orchestrated by Amara, chipped away at the godlike image he had cultivated for so long. In the quiet darkness, Amara allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. She had not yet acted openly. She had not yet revealed the full extent of her power. But the seed had been sown, the Night Master was vulnerable, and her careful strategy would soon reach its climax. And so, the Shadow War continued. The Master who believed himself divine had begun to doubt the very foundations of his rule. And in the darkness, Amara's influence grew, not with force but with precision, patience, and intelligence. If her story moves you, if her bravery inspires, subscribe to Hidden Tales, and follow for more hidden histories that challenge what we think we know about the past. By late autumn, the tension at Black Hollow had reached a boiling point. Amara had prepared meticulously for the moment she would finally confront Elias Hawthorne. Every observation, every act of subtle defiance, every hidden intervention had been a step toward this inevitable reckoning. She had ensured the safety of all vulnerable enslaved individuals, coordinated with trusted allies, and anticipated every possible response. The final confrontation was not one of brute force alone, it was psychological, strategic, and symbolic. In the dead of night, Amara entered the grand hallway of the mansion, silent as a ghost. Her mind replayed the patterns of Elias's behavior over months. The arrogance, the cruelty, the reliance on intimidation. Every detail was now weaponized. She needed him to understand that his godlike delusions had no power over her. Elias, sensing an intruder, arrived in the hallway, lantern in hand. His white eyes gleamed with rage and disbelief. Amara stepped from the shadows, calm and poised, her black eyes sharp with intelligence and courage. The room seemed to hold its breath. She spoke with measured authority, every word chosen to undermine his fragile confidence. "You are not a god," she said softly, yet with an edge that cut through the air. "Your power is built on fear and lies can be unraveled." Elias's glare faltered. The first hint of uncertainty appeared in the eyes that once radiated absolute authority. Amara continued, describing the network of observation, the safe haven she had prepared for the enslaved, and the ways in which his own arrogance had been exploited at every turn. "You have lost control," she said, "not because of rebellion, but because intelligence and courage cannot be silenced." The psychological unraveling of Elias Hawthorne was complete. He was confronted with the truth. His so-called divinity was an illusion, and the world he had built on terror was crumbling under the weight of strategy, resilience, and human ingenuity. Amara had turned the tables not with force alone, but with intellect and vision. As dawn broke over Black Hollow, the enslaved emerged, cautious yet emboldened. Amara had led them through months of subtle defiance to this moment. Elias Hawthorne was no longer untouchable. His godlike image lay in ruins, replaced by the awareness that his arrogance had blinded him to the power of courage, intelligence, and unity. History rarely records these victories. But through careful planning, strategic brilliance, and courage, Amara rewrote the balance of power. And her story reminds us that tyranny, no matter how absolute, is never invincible. If Amara's brilliance and courage moved you, subscribe to Hidden Tales. Share this story. Let the voices of the unseen, the courageous, and the resilient echo once more. Together, we ensure that history never forgets those who fought in the shadows to protect the powerless and challenge the mighty.